What's going on, everybody? This is Joe Harper with Reformed Truther Ministries, and in today's video, we are going to be talking about the Yeti. So, the Yeti is a cryptid that we have never covered on this channel. We've been spending a lot of time talking about Sasquatch, more commonly known as Bigfoot. And when we've been talking about Sasquatch or Bigfoot, we've been referring specifically to the Sasquatch of North America, but there are similar cryptids other than the North American Sasquatch that we're going to be talking about today. And because one of these said cryptids is the Yeti, and the Yeti exists in Asia. It is a large creature, bipedal, large white fur, and it has been called the abominable snowman creature because of the fact that it is large and it is white and it exists in the mountains of Asia, most famously in the Himalayas. And as we're going to be talking about today, this cryptid exists in places like Russia, in the Ural Mountains. It exists in the Himalaya Mountains, most famously, like I just said, in places like Nepal or Tibet or the small Buddhist country of Bhutan. And this is a really fascinating creature. And if you've watched Monsters Inc., you know that the Yeti is famous for liking lemon snow cones. So that is the hidden fact that most people don't know about the Yeti. So I just want to make sure we got that established. Now it's funny that when my sister, she's always got a famous saying for when you get stressed. She always says, "Don't fretty, eat spaghetti." And so I kind of modified her catchphrase, and I told her about this, and she laughed. I said, "Hey Emily," because she knows I like cryptids. I say, "Hey, when you encounter Yeti, don't fretty, eat spaghetti." so so there we go. There's the shout out today. So that's the catchphrase for this video today. That when you encounter Yeti, don't fretty, eat spaghetti. Now, that being said, we're going to get into some of the facts for this cryptid. We're going to try to just lay out some of the sightings, some of the incidents that have surrounded this cryptid, and just talk about the folklore. This cryptid shows up a lot in the folklore of places like Nepal or Bhutan, or I'm sorry, Nepal or Bhutan or Tibet. In the Buddhist mythologies, in their folklore, in their legends, that this creature comes up a lot. And there's also been a lot of modern sightings even in the 20th and 21st century. So we're going to be talking about all that today. Now, it's really been interesting. I've been working my way through, I've been reading Sasquatch Legend Meets Science by Jeff Meldrum, and I've pretty much covered all the material in the book. I still got a little bit more to go. I kind of sped read through it the first time, and then I've been going back and really thoroughly researching the contents of this book, what have you. And I was really interested that Dr. Jeff Meldrum, who is one of the most famous PhDs in the world who has worked on researching Sasquatch, in the beginning of his book, when he's really just laying out his introductions, he actually makes a reference to the Yeti. Even though this book is primarily about North American Sasquatch, he talks about this incident in 1951 when this explorer named Eric Shipton was at Mount Everest and he saw what he claims is a Yeti footprint. And Meldrum kind of goes into a little bit of detail about why he thinks that that's probably a legitimate incident of this man named Eric Shipton finding a Yeti footprint. And that was so I read that pretty much because that happens pretty early in the book, and I was like, wow, that's really interesting. So that was kind of an early little incident surrounding the Yeti. Now, one of the places that where the Yeti shows up a lot is the Himalayas, and now this is something that the Sherpas. Now, if you know anything about the Himalayas, now the Himalayas has some of the largest mountains in the world, most famously Mount Everest, and that there are these in places like Nepal or the small Buddhist country of Bhutan, there are these locals who work guiding people up the mountains called Sherpas because it's climbing these mountains in the Himalayas like Mount Everest or K2. This is an extremely dangerous portion of the world. People die on these mountains pretty essentially every year. And these guides are very adept at getting people up and down these mountains. And many of them have attested to having seen the Yeti, even in the midst of climbing these mountains in the Himalayas. Now, one country that I've mentioned a couple times that is really prominent in Yeti sightings is the small Buddhist kingdom of Bhutan, which is one of the most isolated countries in the world, partly because of its geography. It is really right smack dab in the middle of the Himalaya mountains. And the geography of it alone has made it almost inaccessible, almost completely inaccessible to Westerners. There's very few Westerners who have been in this country. And this isolation was even more reinforced by the fact that Westerners were essentially closed off from entering into the country, even pretty late into the 20th century. So it's really a really modern phenomenon that Westerners have been able to enter into this place at all. And it's really an interesting place because, once again, it's a small Buddhist kingdom with its own culture, legends, folklore, mythology. But in the legends of Bhutan, that there is reference to the abominable snowman, to the Yeti, and they um, they call it the Migo, and that is this white creature. And they warn, there's these tales, these warnings of children that you don't want to be caught out, where you will be caught by the Yeti. So kind of similar to folk stories that are told to children of other cryptids or monsters around the world in Bhutan. And there are similar incidents in Nepal where these stories are told of people seeing the Yeti, not wanting to be caught out or be caught by them. They're said to be dangerous. And that's just really an interesting part of the legend surrounding the Yeti. Now, in more modern times, there have been incidents where people have seen the Yeti creature. They've seen the abominable snowman. And one of the men in modern times who have claimed to have seen this creature is the British explorer and adventurer named Graham Hoyland. Now, Graham Hoyland is famous for he is trying to set foot on every continent and climb the tallest mountain on every continent, and that's kind of his claim to fame if you look him up on his website. Now, if you get more specifically into his, because he's a sailor and a mountaineer, and he's climbed Mount Everest. He's been to Mount Everest many times. And one of the things about him that's interesting, that he has claimed to have seen the Yeti, that him and the Sherpas and some of these climbers going up Mount Everest, that he claims to have had an incident where they saw the creature. So he attests to that it is real. And he's even talked about this on podcasts or on the internet, what have you, which is really, really interesting. So there's been people in modern times, amongst the Sherpas in Nepal and Bhutan. They have known about it. Many of these guys know about the existence of this creature, and some of these Sherpas have even conveyed this information to Westerners. There have been, even though there's only been a really somewhat limited number of Westerners who have gone to the Himalayas and climbed these mountains, that's obviously increased in the 20th and 21st century. There, regardless, have been peoples like Graham Hoyland who have attested to seeing this creature. And we also know that it shows up in the legends, myths, and folklore of the countries that exist in this part of the world. So that's kind of similar to the North American Sasquatch, where we see, with the North American Sasquatch, we see tales of it in the Native American legends, myths, folklore. We have the history of North America. When the Europeans reach the continent, we start to get sightings of that said creature, the Sasquatch. And then we have the modern incidents. We have things like the Patterson Gimlin film, or the many modern hunters or people out in the woods or campers who have seen Sasquatch. And we really have those same lines of evidence in the Himalayas with the Yeti. So that's very interesting. So we have multiple people, even people who are academics or PhDs or well-known explorers, that people who would probably have something to risk or lose, to claiming to see a legendary or mythological creature. And these guys have claimed, like an Eric Shipton, or even a Jeff Meldrum putting it in his book, or a Graham Hoyland, an explorer. These guys have been willing to say that the Yeti exists. Now, I know that this information is somewhat anecdotal. I know it's not going to convince all the skeptics, but once again, it all contributes to building a case for the existence of this creature, which is, once again, really, really fascinating. Now, one of the incidents I want to talk about is actually not in the Himalayas, but in the Ural Mountains. So this is in Russia, and this is one of the most famous uh, cryptid incidents, if you want to call it that, the Dyatlov Pass incident that took place in the Soviet Union. And I'm excited to talk about this incident because of the fact that we've never talked about it on this channel. Now, if you've watched certain shows on the History Channel, monster shows, or This comes up on Ancient Aliens. They always, these type of shows, they always talk about the Dyatlov Pass incident. Now this took place on February 1st and 2nd, because it took place overnight, so one day into the next day, in 1959 in the what was then the Soviet Union. We know that since the end of the Cold War, since 1991, the Soviet Union had broken up into multiple countries. But this took place in the midst of the really the golden age, if you want to call it that, really the heyday, the prime of the Soviet Empire. And that these campers, these hikers, there were 9 of these hikers, and they were in the Ural Mountains. And the Urals are this famous mountain range that exists in the Soviet Union. They kind of separate the western part of the Soviet Union from the east. During World War II, Stalin famously moved all his factories to the eastern side of the Urals to put them out of reach from being destroyed by the invading Germans during World War II. So the Ural Mountains, in the Siberia region, this is a very central part of this massive landmass that we know as the Soviet Union or Russia. Now, these 9 hikers in February 1st and 2nd, 1959, this is the region of the country where they were camping, and that their bodies, these 9 hikers were found dead the next day. And what happened is that when the authorities examined it and they examined their tents, it was evident that something had startled them, that had scared them half to death, and they had ripped out of their tent without using the doors or whatever. If you can imagine this tent, they ripped through it to get away from something, or some things perhaps. And that 6 of these 9 hikers died from hypothermia. So the idea is that these people are sleeping, they're trying to get some rest, and then something comes up to their tents, attacks them, whatever. They're trying to get away from it. They rip through their tents without any proper winter clothing, and they try to get away from whatever attacked them, and they die from hypothermia. Now, the other 3 of the 9, when their bodies were examined, they died of physical trauma. Now, 2 of them had chest trauma based on the evidence, the investigation that followed, and one of them had a crack to the skull. So even though we don't know specifically what attacked these hikers, many people have attested, and I think with some amount of credibility, that some type of a creature or a monster or a cryptid attacked them. And many cryptid researchers believe that it was Yeti, because just like how there have been reports of Yeti in the Himalayas, that's where they are most famous, there have also been reports of Yeti in the Ural Mountains in what today would be Russia or some of these Central Asian countries. So this is a creature that shows up in many different parts of the Asian landmass. Now, the Dyatlov Pass incident is a mystery. It's a mystery that has really persisted up into modern times, but it is an incident that really has found its place into the folklore of cryptids in our modern day. Very similar to the controversy and the debate that surrounds the Patterson-Gimlin film. We also have a lot of mystery and speculation and theories surrounding the Dyatlov Pass incident. Now, one of the other things I want to mention, that there was this book written called The Long Walk. Now, this is the last piece of evidence I'm going to give for the existence of the Yeti. And there were these Polish POWs who actually ended up, Poland got invaded by the Germans from the west during World War II and the Soviets from the east. And some of these Poles actually ended up throwing their lot in with the Germans, because in the chaos of their country being carved up by these 2 invading empires, some of them collaborated with one side or the other to try to survive this war. Now, what happened was that these Polish soldiers got captured by the Soviets, and they ended up in the Soviet Union, and they claimed to walk south down toward India across much of the Asian landmass. And this book, The Long Walk, really isn't about Yeti or these creatures, but when you read that book, there is a reference to the existence of Yetis in that book. So just once again, one little piece of evidence that these Yetis have been seen in places like the Ural Mountains in Russia. They've been seen in places like the Himalaya Mountains in Tibet or Nepal or Bhutan. So it seems to me that they're just like how there are cryptids in various parts of the North American landmass in the United States and Canada. I'm referring to Sasquatch. And there are other cryptids as well that we've talked about on this channel, like the Dogman or whatever. it seems that in Asia that there is this cryptid, the Yeti, this bipedal large cryptid with the white fur that exists in multiple parts of the Asian continent, the Asian landmass. So that is really something that gives us a lot to think about. So that's really what I have for you guys today. This is really just supposed to be an introductory video to a cryptid that we haven't talked about yet. Feel free to let me know what you think about the cryptid, the Yeti. Do you think it's mythological? Do you think it's real? Feel free to let me know in the comments below. And stay tuned for what's next with Reformed Truther Ministries. We're going to be getting out into the field even in the next week or two. We got more Sasquatch hunting on the scenes. We've gotten some pretty exciting leads that we're hoping to share some about as much as we can. We've had some people get in contact with us, and we are investigating leads behind the scenes. So there's going to be a lot more exciting content about Bigfoot and Sasquatch coming up in the weeks ahead. So stay tuned. With what's coming up with Reformed Truther Ministries. That being said, this is Joe Harper with RTM. God bless everybody. If you've been blessed by the ministry of RTM, then consider supporting our ministry through Buy Me a Coffee. And check out our website at www.reformedtruther.com.